the heterotopic plural reading of As You Like It, of course, is something I deeply love. And I have a queer daughter called Rosalind to prove it. I'm reminded by your talk of As You Like It that in that play, Jaques speaks of the scholar's melancholy, which is emulation. Stereotypically, academics resent one another's success, would desperately love to outperform each other, to be on more reading lists, to have more grand titles. And so stereotypically, I ought to be seething with anxious resentment that Alexa was the inaugural recipient of the Bell Hooks Legacy Award, that she held the Fulbright Distinguished Chair at Queen Mary University of London and the John M. Kirk Chair at Breadloaf, that she received the Scaglione Prize, that contemporary readings in global performance won the Barbara Hodgson Award. All of these things ought to make me furious, angry, and insecure. But in fact, the flip side of Jaques' rather jaundiced view of the scholarly life is that actually scholars do also feel an enormous amount of admiration and gratitude for one another's work. And I'm really pleased to be sitting here advertising the books which I didn't write. Alexa, because her book has made it so much easier for me to teach performance and performance in Asia and performance and Shakespeare's roles in cultures all over the place for some time now. Alexa is going to speak about Transitional Shakespeare, her forthcoming title, which is it's very exciting to hear more about. Let me get out of the way of the screen and hand over to Alexa.
In a pivotal scene in John Madden's Shakespeare in Love from 1998, Will Shakespeare shares a boat ride with Thomas Kent on the Thames. Thomas tells Will he is the cousin of Viola de Lesseps. Will confides his love for Viola to Thomas, and the two speak of Viola in the third person. The unsuspecting Will seems to have no clue that Viola, adopting the path of a typical Shakespearean heroine, is presenting as Thomas to coach him in equitable courtship. After arriving at the de Lesseps mansion, Thomas rushes inside as Will gives chase, having been tipped off by the boatman. Will climbs up some vine on a balcony and gets into a lady's bedroom. Just as Viola enters by the door without the prop of moustache, but still in Thomas' attire. The bedroom door is a transitory gateway. Thomas walks through it to emerge as Viola, like a theatrical role, to meet her idol. As Viola attempts to take off Will's shirt, she confesses that she does not know how to undress a man, to which Will replies, "It is strange for me too." Will's response could be directed toward Thomas' attire, of course, or to Will's own masculine outfits, which he finds alienating in this moment. Will's comment could also be interpreted as his treating Thomas as a boy actor in his own right, rather than merely a noble woman's disguise or a plot device. Despite the removal of gender accessories such as the moustache and the wig, their language suggests the continuous presence of Thomas in the bedroom. The scene thus amplifies the artifice of gender and entertains the possibility that Will is undressing a man. Viola's bedroom is a transitory space where the two converge to undergo further transformations. This is an example of transness, namely the practices that cross over or modify social or temporal boundaries. Transness is a mode of analysis rather than merely an identity category. That, my friend, is the topic of my new book on Transitional Shakespeare. In its imaginations of what could have been, the biopic Shakespeare in Love rearranges life events to suit its narratological goals, giving the impression that time is both out of joint and circular. The idea of a non-linear timeline echoes trans individuals' life experience. Trans performer Emma Franklin writes that her body has taken non-normative routes through adulthood and later puberty. As a result, she time-traveled within her own lifetime. Let us take a look at another example. The Taiwanese film As We Like It from 2021 has an all-female cast. This film taps into a similar sense of transness to enact Shakespearean gender play. This is especially evident in a scene that parallels the courtship rehearsal scenes in the Forest of Arden in As You Like It. In the Taiwanese film, presenting as a palmist named Roosevelt, the Rosalind figure opens a palm reading salon in internet-free Arden in Taipei. Orlando produces a photo of Rosalind and asks for Roosevelt's advice on how to win her heart. As the palm reading session progresses, Orlando becomes distracted and begins to remark on the similarity between Roosevelt and Rosalind, including their hair texture and bodily scent. On the surface, this sequence echoes the toxic filmic trope of outing trans characters against their will. However, the film constructs a fluid world where internal identities develop without external partitions. Social categories do not have indexical value. The film explores multiple lived experiences without any definitive conclusion about who is who or who should fall in love with whom. Let us turn to one last example, which is Richard Ayer's Othello-inspired film Stage Beauty. This 2004 film is set in the Restoration era. The film follows the stage career and personal life of the 17th century adult boy actor Nat Keniston. In an early scene, Keniston has given another evening performance as Othello's wife Desdemona, earning a standing ovation. After the audience clears the auditorium, Keniston returns to the empty stage to rehearse affectionate feminine gestures. Surprising him, in the onstage bed behind him is the Duke of Buckingham, who calls out, "Milady." In this dimly lit room with a dark blue tint, the Duke kisses Keniston before pulling out a blonde wig. "Put it on, will you?" he cajoles. He says, with a double entendre, "I'd like to see a golden flow as I die in you." So here the Duke connects orgasm with death as a Renaissance metaphor. Displeased with the wig, Keniston asks, "Would you ask your lady horse to wear a wig to bed?" hinting both at the Duke's promiscuity and his double standard. The Duke replies glibly, "If it made them more of a woman." The fact that their encounter takes place on a theatrical stage only drives home the idea of a transitional space. It is in this sense that the three key words of my book's title, Shakespeare, Gender, and Adaptation, are transitional. Transness is the state of being in a transitional space, in a transitional time, and of course also genre. I use trans as a method to highlight the power of unspoken words. In Shakespeare, gender is in fact a genre and romantic love is a craft. By genre, I refer to conventions for self-expression and interpersonal relationships. Gender is made flesh and brought into being by actors onstage and offstage expressions. Gender is not fictional, but it is definitely produced by fiction. And here, by fiction, we mean narratives and structures that are making certain things possible or plausible. While the cross-gender role is a staple of Shakespeare's plays, I use a capacious definition of transness to look at and beyond gender, including transitional social spaces. Now, similarly, adaptation also operates transitionally and translationally. Some adaptations translate narratives into hospital forms of expression. Other adaptations function as minor uses of established genres or better known gender categories. Conventions and genres make certain things plausible and deem certain things impossible. Now, gender itself is always a type of adaptation. Gendered accessories and clothing are part of artifice, right? Trans characters, they may engage in gender-affirming practices such as packing and chest binding. However, my research shows that cis characters, cisgender people, they also engage in practices that keep reaffirming their identities, such as shaving and hairstyling. An example is a comedic scene in Andy Fickman's film She's the Man from 2006, which is inspired by Twelfth Night. As Viola Sebastian sits on a bench in the boarding school Illyria, Principal Gold catches him scratching his wig. The principal spontaneously diagnoses him for suffering from male pattern baldness and assumes the hairpiece is a management tool. Citing his personal experience living with baldness, he encourages Sebastian to come out of the closet and just accept yourself for who you are, a baldy. He adds that chicks dig it. His language echoes that of a gender minorities coming out narrative, but with a twist. The wig is a gender prosthesis for Sebastian, but as the principal misunderstands it, it functions equally well as an important tool for cis men with male pattern baldness. Treating gender and adaptation as transitional means that I closely analyze gender expressions that operate within and against conventions. The films I cited exemplify minor uses of established categories of genders and genres. By minor use, I mean new expressions that do not follow the proverbial manual. I define trans literature in a capacious manner, to include not only works by trans-identified authors, but also significantly trans-adjacent productions that feature cis-sexism, but without characters who explicitly identify as trans. Julia Serrano defines cis-sexism as the belief that trans people's genders are less authentic. The object for analysis is no longer trans testimonies or trans individuals, but rather the cis-sexist framework. I do not diagnose characters as trans or a work as trans. The question is not which character may be queer or trans in a modern sense, but rather the focus is on the openness of the narrative. My capacious notion of transness as transitivity has important implications for Shakespeare studies. It can address biases from the long history of talking about cross-dressing in Shakespearean criticism. The erroneous term cross-dressing has created a binary between the body and the clothing. It is as if the body is somehow true and the clothing is somehow deceptive. Transness method considers a broad range of identitarian practices beyond gender assignment or reassignment. In developing a new trans theory and in analyzing these films, I delineate trans aesthetics, namely the sensory crafted nature of narratives. Artifice is traditionally associated with inauthenticity, especially with superficial femininity due to uses of cosmetics. But clothing, makeup, props, and sets are all part of the performance condition and part of the human condition. Trans aesthetics counter the fantasy of self-sufficient independent subjectivity. This fantasy is part and parcel of the toxic obsessions with purity and individualism. Clothing is not external to the human, but is rather part of the personhood. In theater and film, artifice and the materiality of costumes and props affect how actors embody their roles, just like how prostheses are integrated into individuals' relations to their environment. This is evident in Mark Rylance' performance of a grieving Olivia in Tim Carroll's all-male 12th Night at the London Globe in 2012. He noted that when you have the hoops inside of a dress like that, if you don't keep yourself stable as you're moving, the dress rocks back and forth. I wanted her to move like a big ship, unaffected by the waves around her. I believe that trans aesthetics contribute to reciprocal acts of care. And ethics of care, quite simply, assumes that all characters, all actors, audiences, and readers, we need care and give care to one another. Through this trans lens, there is estrangement. What people have taken for granted can now be re-examined. And through this estrangement, there is self-empowerment. In summer 2025, I had the good fortune of being a consultant for a 12th night with an all-trans cast, and we had Sir Ian McKellen gave opening remarks and his blessing. This is an example of community work that is informed by an ethics of care. Understanding the nature of life through a capacious notion of transness would make cultural criticism an act of care through estrangement and empowerment. Instead of engaging in suspension of disbelief regarding gender crossings, and instead of becoming preoccupied with the question of the actor's self-identification, audiences could practice suspension of cis-sexism. On my slide about my book, Transitional Shakespeare, I put this photograph from Taiwan showing a girl letting go of a sky lantern. And this is part of a very important festival in Taiwan where people write their dreams and hopes on the lantern. I wanted to conclude with a note of hope. Please feel free to follow me on YouTube or on my website. I would love to hear from you. Here is my email. Thank you.